The Galactic Council chambers buzzed with nervous energy as delegates from 17 different species gathered in emergency session. At the center of the massive crystalline structure floating in space, holographic displays showed the same disturbing image across multiple screens: a human vessel approaching the forbidden sector. Ambassador's four arms gestured frantically as his voice echoed through the translation matrix. This madness must stop. The humans have no understanding of what they approach. The representative, a towering figure covered in chitinous plates, clicked his mandibles in agreement. For 2 centuries, every species in the galaxy has honored the barrier around that system. The warnings are clear in 14 languages. 15, corrected the ethereal delegate, her form shimmering like captured starlight. We added human standard just 50 years ago when they joined the council. Admiral Sarah stood calmly at the human delegation podium, her weathered face showing no emotion as the alien voices rose around her. Behind her, Captain shifted uncomfortably, his military bearing rigid despite the chaos surrounding them. Admiral's voice carried undertones of desperation that the translation matrix struggled to convey. You must recall your ship immediately. The consequences of approaching that world are beyond your species' comprehension. Sarah's gray eyes swept the assembly before she spoke, her voice cutting through the din with practiced authority. Respected delegates, the independent vessel Prometheus is operating under salvage rights in unclaimed territory. Our pilot filed proper documentation 48 hours ago. A collective gasp erupted from the non-human delegates. The representative, resembling a massive crystalline spider, spoke in harmonics that made the air vibrate. Unclaimed? That system has been quarantined since before your species achieved faster-than-light travel. By whose authority? Sarah's question hung in the air like a challenge. The Galactic Council Charter clearly states that quarantine zones must be registered with specific legal justification. Your records show only warnings, not legal claims. Captain leaned forward slightly, his voice barely audible. Admiral, perhaps we should consider. The legal precedent is clear, Captain. Sarah's tone brooked no argument. If the Council wishes to claim jurisdiction, they need to provide evidence of legitimate authority. The delegate's massive form trembled with agitation. Legal precedent? Admiral, there are forces in this galaxy that exist beyond your human concepts of law and jurisdiction. That world contains something that has slept for, something that our ancestors deemed too dangerous to approach. Yet none of you will explain what exactly we're supposed to fear, Sarah replied. Vague warnings about ancient dangers aren't sufficient legal grounds for territorial claims. The chamber fell silent except for the humming of life support systems. Finally, the eldest member of the council, an ancient whose tree-like form had witnessed 5,000 years of galactic history, spoke in a voice like rustling leaves. Human Admiral, in all my centuries, I have seen the rise and fall of civilizations. I have witnessed stars being born and dying. But the world your pilot approaches, it was old when my species first reached for the stars. Sarah's expression softened slightly, showing respect for the ancient being. Elder, I appreciate your concern, but my people have a saying: extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If you cannot tell us specifically what threatens our pilot, we cannot justify violating his legal rights. The holographic displays suddenly shifted, showing new data streams from the approaching human vessel. The ship's designation appeared clearly: ISV Prometheus, piloted by Dr. James, civilian researcher and Admiral's younger brother. Your family, the delegate's form flickered with surprise. You allow your own blood to approach this danger. Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Doctor is a qualified operating within his legal rights. Personal relationships don't supersede proper procedure. Ambassador's four arms spread in a gesture of pleading. Admiral, please listen carefully to what I'm about to share. This information has been restricted for 2 centuries, passed down only through the highest levels of our governments. The chamber grew deathly quiet. Even the elder's ancient form seemed to lean forward with attention. The world your brother approaches was once home to the architects, continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. They were beings of such immense power that they could reshape reality with thought alone. But something happened to them. Something that forced every sapient species in this part of the galaxy to work together for the first and last time in recorded history. Captain found his voice, What happened to them? The delegate's massive head turned toward the human delegation. They created something, an entity that even they could not control. In desperation, they bound it to one of their own kind and cast themselves into an eternal sleep, becoming living prisons to contain what they had unleashed. Sarah's military training kept her expression neutral, but her mind raced. And you believe this entity still exists? We know it does, the delegate whispered, her form dimming noticeably. Because the prison still sleeps on that world. A female architect, her eyes bound with wrappings that pulse with energies our best scientists cannot identify. For 200 years since our first scout discovered her, she has remained in perfect stasis. The elder's voice carried the weight of, "The barrier around that system isn't just a quarantine, Admiral, it's a vigil. Our combined fleets maintain constant watch, ready to prevent anyone from approaching close enough to disturb her rest." "And if she wakes?" Sarah asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. His forearms trembled. "According to the few architect records we've managed to translate, the entity bound within her consciousness was their greatest creation and their ultimate mistake. They called it the something capable of unraveling the fundamental forces that hold reality together." The holographic displays chimed softly, indicating an incoming transmission from the Prometheus. All eyes turned to Admiral as she activated her personal communicator. "James, report your status." Her brother's voice crackled through subspace interference. "Sarah, I'm detecting massive artificial structures on the fourth planet. The architecture is unlike anything in our databases. I'm requesting permission to land and investigate." Before Sarah could respond, stepped forward. "Doctor, this is Ambassador of the Galactic Council. You are approaching a restricted zone. Please alter course immediately and return to Council space." James' laugh echoed through the chamber. "Ambassador, with respect, I've checked the legal databases. There are no registered claims on this system. I'm proceeding with my scheduled archaeological survey." The ancient spoke directly to the communicator, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with primal fear. "Young human, I implore you, what sleeps on that world has remained undisturbed for good reason. Do not let curiosity override wisdom." "Elder," James replied, his voice growing distant as he concentrated on his instrument readings, "I appreciate your concerns, but I've devoted my career to studying dead civilizations. I've never encountered a site that posed any actual danger to a properly equipped researcher." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, recognizing the stubborn determination in her brother's voice that had driven him to become one of humanity's foremost. It was the same determination that had carried their family through generations of military service. "James, the council delegates are claiming there's some kind of preserved entity on the planet, a being from the original civilization that built those structures." "Even better," James replied, excitement clear in his transmission. "A preserved architect? Sarah, this could be the discovery of the millennium. Think about what we could learn about the galaxy's ancient history." The delegate's chitinous plates clattered with agitation. "He doesn't understand. The architects weren't just another ancient species. They existed on a level beyond our comprehension. Their least creations could manipulate matter and energy in ways that violate our understanding of physics." "Doctor," the delegate's voice carried an ethereal quality that seemed to speak directly to the mind. "What your instruments detect as architecture may be something far more complex. The architects built with living materials, structures that think and respond to consciousness." James's voice came back, tinged with wonder. "The energy readings are incredible. There's some kind of massive structure at the planetary North Pole, perfectly preserved despite being exposed to the elements for. I'm setting down about 2 kilometers away to begin preliminary scans." "James, wait," Sarah began, but the transmission had already ended as her brother entered the planet's atmosphere. Ambassador's forearms writhed with anxiety. "Admiral, you must understand. Every species represented in this chamber has ancestors who witnessed what the architects were capable of at their peak. The stories passed down through our oral traditions speak of beings who could create new forms of matter, who could step between dimensions as easily as walking through doorways. And yet they're extinct," Sarah pointed out. "Whatever power they possessed, it wasn't enough to save them." The elder's ancient voice carried a note of profound sadness. "They chose extinction, Admiral. Rather than risk their creation escaping into the galaxy, they sacrificed their entire civilization to contain it. The female you brother approaches is their final guardian, locked in eternal vigilance. Captain stepped closer to Admiral. Ma'am, perhaps we should dispatch a rescue mission, if even half of what they're saying is true. Captain, my brother is a trained professional operating in legal space, Sarah cut him off. Until we have concrete evidence of danger, we cannot justify military intervention. The holographic displays suddenly flared with new data as the Prometheus's automated systems began transmitting surface readings. The assembled delegates fell silent as images of the architect's city appeared before them. Massive spires of what appeared to be crystallized light stretched toward the sky, their surfaces reflecting colors that existed nowhere in the natural spectrum. Streets paved with materials that seemed to shift and flow despite being obviously solid. And at the center of it all, a structure that architectural logic, a building that appeared to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Magnificent, whispered the delegate, her form brightening despite her obvious fear. I had forgotten how beautiful their constructions were. The representative's massive form shuddered. Beautiful and terrible, that central structure, it's not just a building. It's a prison designed by minds that understood the fundamental nature of reality itself. New data streams showed James' biosignatures as he began his survey of the outer city. His excitement was palpable even through the sterile medical readouts. Elevated heart rate, increased neural activity, all consistent with a researcher making the discovery of a lifetime. Admiral's voice carried desperate urgency. Your brother's presence alone may be enough to disturb systems that have remained dormant for. Architect technology responds to consciousness itself. The more intelligent the observer, the more likely it is to activate. Sarah studied the incoming data, her military mind analyzing threat assessments and risk factors. What exactly are you suggesting, Ambassador? That thinking too hard near their ruins is dangerous? In a sense, yes, the ancient replied. Architect constructions were designed to interface directly with conscious minds. They fed on curiosity, on the desire to understand. The more intensely someone studied their creations, the deeper the connection became. The chamber's emergency alert system suddenly activated, bathing everything in pulsing red light. New data streams showed massive energy fluctuations emanating from the planet's north pole, the exact location of the central structure James was approaching. It's beginning, the delegate whispered, her form flickering like a candle in the wind. After 2 centuries of silence, the prison stirs. Doctor, James stepped out of his ship onto the crystalline surface of the architect's city, his breathing apparatus filtering the thin but breathable atmosphere. Every instinct he'd developed during 15 years of research screamed that this place was different. The very air seemed to hum with potential energy, and his instruments registered readings that shouldn't have been possible. Sarah, are you receiving my telemetry? He spoke into his communicator while adjusting his portable scanner array. The device in his hands looked primitive compared to the flowing architecture surrounding him, its crude metal and plastic construction a stark contrast to buildings that seemed grown rather than built. His sister's voice crackled back through layers of subspace interference. Confirmed, James. Your readings are unusual. The council delegates are requesting you maintain minimum safe distance from the central structure. James looked up at the spire that dominated the city's heart, its impossible geometry making his eyes water when he tried to focus on its upper reaches. Define safe distance, Sarah. This entire city appears to be one interconnected organism. I'm getting energy readings from street surfaces that suggest the whole place is some kind of massive machine. He began walking toward the city center, his boots clicking against surfaces that felt warm despite the planet's cold climate. Every step seemed to generate tiny ripples of light that spread outward like stones dropped in still water. Behind him, his footprints glowed faintly before fading back to the crystal's natural luminescence. James, the delegates are sharing some historical data about the architects. Sarah's voice carried a note of concern he rarely heard from his military-trained sister. According to their records, this species existed on a completely different level of technological development. Their cities were alive in ways we don't fully understand. I'm starting to believe that, James replied, stopping to examine a flowing sculpture that seemed to change shape when he wasn't looking directly at it. The mathematical complexity here is staggering. These structures are incorporating dimensional geometries that shouldn't be stable in normal space-time. His scanner began emitting rapid beeps as he approached what appeared to be a public square in the city's heart. At its center stood a fountain that physics, water flowing upward in perfect spirals, forming complex patterns in midair before returning to its basin in streams that curved through three-dimensional space like living things. "Sarah, I'm uploading visual data now. You need to see this to believe it." In the council chambers, the assembled delegates watched James's footage with expressions ranging from awe to terror. The representatives' chitinous plates rattled constantly, while the delegates' form had dimmed to barely visible levels. "The fountain," Ambassador whispered, his forearms trembling. "It still functions after all this time. The architects built things that were meant to last forever." Elder's ancient voice carried notes of profound sadness. That fountain was a celebration of their mastery over natural forces. Water that remembers the sky, they called it, but such beauty came at a terrible cost. Admiral studied the transmitted images with a strategist's eye. What kind of cost? To create things that persist beyond their makers' lifetimes, the architects had to bind portions of their own consciousness into their constructions, the elder explained. Every beautiful thing you see in that city contains fragments of living minds, trapped in eternal service to their original purpose. Captain leaned closer to the display screens. "Are you saying the city itself is alive?" "More than alive," the delegate replied, her voice barely audible. "It's inhabited by the dreams and memories of an entire civilization, and now a human consciousness is walking through those dreams." On the planet's surface, James had reached the edge of the central square. Before him rose the impossible spire that served as the city's heart, a structure that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Its base was solid enough, constructed from the same flowing crystal as the rest of the city, but as his eyes followed its ascent, the building began to fold in on itself in ways that hurt to contemplate. "This is architecturally impossible," he muttered, adjusting his instruments to try capturing meaningful measurements. "The structure appears to extend into spaces that don't exist in our dimensional framework." His scanner suddenly emitted a sharp warning tone. Energy readings were spiking dramatically, centered on something at the spire's base. James approached cautiously, his scientific training warring with an instinctive sense of danger that seemed to emanate from the building itself. "James, we're detecting massive power fluctuations from your location." Sarah's voice carried new urgency. "Whatever you're approaching, it's causing system-wide responses across the planet." "I can see why," James replied, his voice filled with awe and growing concern. "Sarah, there's someone here." At the base of the impossible spire, seated on what appeared to be a throne carved from living starlight, was a figure that was unmistakably humanoid yet utterly alien. She was tall and elegant, her proportions speaking of a grace that no purely human form could achieve. But what drew James's attention immediately were the bandages wrapped around her eyes, not crude cloth, but strips of material that seemed to contain swirling galaxies within their weave. "She's alive," James whispered into his communicator. "Her chest is rising and falling, but so slowly it's almost imperceptible, and the bandages around her eyes, they're not static. There's something moving inside them." In the council chamber, every delegate fell silent. The holographic displays showed clear images of the sleeping architect, and the sight sent waves of primal fear through species that had evolved on worlds separated by thousands of light years. "The Guardian," Elder spoke in tones of profound reverence mixed with terror. "She has maintained her vigil for two, the last of her kind, binding though with her own consciousness." "Doctor," Ambassador's voice carried desperate urgency, "you must not approach any closer. The bandages around her eyes are not restraints. They are the prison itself. They contain energies that could reshape reality if disturbed." James studied the sleeping figure with a strained eye. "The preservation is perfect. Whatever technology they used to maintain her in this state, it's beyond anything in our databases. But why the bandages? What could be so dangerous about her eyes?" "According to architect records we've managed to translate," the delegate explained. "The entity they created existed as pure thought, pure will-given form. To contain it, they had to bind it to one of their own, someone strong enough to hold it in check through sheer force of consciousness." "And her eyes?" James asked, though he was already moving closer to the sleeping Guardian despite the warnings echoing through his communicator. The delegate's form flickered weakly. The architects saw with more than physical organs. Their eyes were windows to consciousness itself, To bind she had to look directly into its essence and refuse to blink for 2,000 years. James's scanner readings went wild as he approached within 10 meters of the Guardian. The air around her seemed to shimmer with barely contained energies, and he could feel a pressure against his mind, unlike anything he'd experienced before. "She's beautiful," he said softly, studying the Guardian's peaceful features. Despite the obvious alien nature of her bone structure and proportions, there was something profoundly moving about her expression. Even in sleep, her face showed the strain of unimaginable burden. "James, please step back," Sarah's voice carried an edge of command. "Whatever you're feeling, it may not be entirely your own thoughts. The delegates are saying architect technology can influence human consciousness." But James found himself unable to retreat. The closer he came to the Guardian, the more he felt a strange resonance, as if his mind was harmonizing with some vast, sleeping intelligence. He could sense something beyond the physical form before him, a consciousness of incredible depth and complexity, locked in eternal struggle with something else, something that felt like hunger given form. "I can feel her," James whispered. "She's not just sleeping, she's fighting something, has been fighting it for centuries. The strain is incredible." His hand reached toward the Guardian's bandaged face before he consciously decided to move. The moment his fingers came within a meter of the cosmic wrappings, the entire city responded. Every crystal surface began to pulse with synchronized light, and the impossible fountain in the square behind him erupted in spirals of light that painted rainbow patterns across the sky. "James, no," Sarah's voice cut through the growing hum of awakening systems. "The entire planet's energy grid just activated. Whatever you're doing, stop." But James couldn't stop. As his awareness expanded through contact with the Guardian's sleeping mind, he began to understand the true scope of what the architects had sacrificed. She wasn't just a prison guard, she was a living lock, her entire being focused on containing something that existed beyond normal reality. And that something was starting to wake up. The bandages around the Guardian's eyes began to pulse more rapidly, cosmic energies swirling within their weave like captured storms. James could feel the entity stirring, drawn by the presence of a new consciousness after centuries of isolation. "It knows I'm here," James said, his voice filled with wonder and growing terror. "The thing she's containing, it's curious about humanity. It wants to understand what we are." Through his expanding awareness, James glimpsed flashes of this true nature. It wasn't evil in any human sense. It was something far more terrifying. It was the ultimate expression of entropy, of the universe's tendency toward disorder. But it possessed intelligence, creativity, and an insatiable desire to reduce all complexity to elegant simplicity. The architects created it to solve the problem of suffering, James realized, his voice barely audible. They wanted to create a force that could eliminate all pain, all confusion, all struggle, but they made it too well. It didn't just want to end suffering, it wanted to end everything that could potentially cause suffering. The Guardian's breathing began to quicken, and for the first time in her perfect stillness showed signs of disturbance. The cosmic energies in her bandages swirled faster, and James could feel the pressing against its prison with renewed vigor. "James, the Guardian is waking up," Sarah's voice carried absolute terror. "Every council fleet in the sector is moving to maximum alert. Whatever happens next, you need to be ready." But James, standing before a sleeping god with his hand extended toward the moment Dr. James, his fingertips made contact with the Guardian's bandages. Reality itself seemed to hold its breath. The cosmic fabric wrapped around her eyes pulsed once with brilliant light, and suddenly James wasn't standing in the Crystal City anymore. He found himself floating in a vast space that description, not the emptiness of vacuum, but a realm where thought took physical form and consciousness shaped the very nature of existence. Before him, two entities struggled in eternal conflict, their battle playing out on scales both cosmic and intimate. The Guardian appeared as she truly was, a being of living starlight whose very essence held the fabric of space-time together through pure will. Her consciousness was vast beyond human comprehension, yet James could sense the terrible burden she carried. For she had been locked in mental combat with something that should never have existed. The writhed around her like a living shadow, its form constantly shifting between states of matter and energy. It wasn't truly malevolent, that would have been easier to understand. Instead, it was perfection given predatory form, an entity that sought to reduce all complexity to perfect, sterile simplicity. "You are not of their making," the Guardian's voice echoed directly in James's mind, carrying harmonics of exhaustion and fatting hope. "How do you exist here, small one?" James struggled to form coherent thoughts in the overwhelming presence of beings whose intelligence dwarfed his own. "I'm human. I came here seeking knowledge of your people." Human, the word rippled through the space around them, and James felt the Guardian's attention focus on him with laser intensity. "Show me this humanity you speak of." Without conscious volition, James's mind opened like a flower, revealing the entirety of human experience to the ancient being. She saw their wars and their art, their cruelty and their compassion, their endless capacity for both creation and destruction. But what captured her attention wasn't humanity's achievements or failures, it was their stubbornness. "Fascinating," the Guardian murmured, and for the first time in centuries, James felt her attention waver from the, "Your species has achieved something we never could." "What do you mean?" "You have learned to live with imperfection, to find beauty in chaos, strength in weakness, hope in despair. We sought to eliminate these things, believing them flaws to be corrected." The stirred, sensing the Guardian's momentary distraction. Its shadowy form began to press harder against her mental defenses, seeking any crack through which it might escape into the wider universe. "The prison weakens," the Guardian said, her voice growing strained. "I have held this vigil for 2,000 years, but my strength finally fails. Soon the will break free, and it will reshape your galaxy into its vision of perfection, a universe without pain, without struggle, without life itself." James felt the crushing weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. "There has to be something we can do, some way to reinforce the prison." "The only way to strengthen these bonds would be to add another consciousness to the prison," the Guardian explained. "But it would require someone capable of looking directly into this essence without being consumed by its perfect logic. Few minds can witness its truth and maintain their sense of self." Through the mental link, James suddenly understood what the Guardian was asking. To save the galaxy, someone would need to share her burden, to bind part of their own consciousness into the eternal struggle against the... "I'll do it," James said without hesitation. The Guardian's surprise rippled through their shared mental space. "You cannot comprehend what you offer, small one. To join this prison is to sacrifice everything you are for an eternity of struggle. You will lose your individuality, your memories, your very sense of self." "Will it save lives?" "Yes, with a human consciousness added to the prison, I could maintain the bindings for perhaps another 1,000 years. But you would cease to exist as James. You would become part of the lock itself." James thought of his sister Sarah, commanding fleets in humanity's defense. He thought of the billions of humans just beginning to explore the galaxy, unaware that their very existence hung in the balance. He thought of all the alien species he'd encountered in his research, each one unique and precious in their own way. "The architects were brilliant," James said, his decision crystallizing. "But they made one crucial mistake. They tried to eliminate imperfection instead of learning to live with it. Humans understand that chaos isn't the enemy, stagnation is." The Guardian studied him through their mental link, seeing depths in human psychology that even she hadn't anticipated. "Your species' greatest strength is your refusal to accept impossible situations. You always believe there must be another way." "Because there usually is," James replied. "But sometimes the other way requires sacrifice." As he spoke, James felt this attention focus on him with terrifying intensity. The entity had been contained for so long that it had grown curious about the minds holding it prisoner. Now, confronted with a completely alien form of consciousness, it pressed forward to understand this new variable. James looked directly into this essence and saw perfect, beautiful oblivion. It wasn't destruction in any human sense. It was the ultimate expression of mathematical elegance. The entity wanted to reduce all existence to its simplest possible state, eliminating the messy complexities of consciousness, emotion, and individual will. "I can see why they created you," James said, addressing the directly. "You represent the ultimate solution to every problem. No more war, no more suffering, no more confusion, just perfect peace." The pulsed with something resembling pleasure at being understood. For the first time it had encountered a mind that could appreciate its purpose without immediately recoiling in horror. "But here's what you don't understand," James continued. The problems you solve are the same things that make life worth living. Struggle creates growth. Conflict breeds innovation. Even suffering, as terrible as it is, teaches compassion. Through their mental link, the Guardian felt something unprecedented happening. Instead of trying to contain or suppress James was engaging it in philosophical debate. And somehow, incredibly, his arguments were having an effect. Your creators made you too perfect, James explained to the cosmic entity. They gave you the power to end all problems, but they forgot that some problems are meant to be lived with, not solved. The chaos of existence isn't a bug, it's a feature. This form began to shift, its perfect geometry becoming slightly less rigid as it contemplated this alien perspective. For 2,000 years, it had been opposed by the Guardian's sheer force of will. But James offered something different, understanding without submission, acceptance without surrender. You want to protect the universe from suffering, James said. But a universe without the possibility of suffering is a universe without the possibility of joy, growth, or meaning. You can't have one without the other. In the council chambers, alarms began blaring as energy readings from the planet shifted dramatically. The impossible spire was pulsing with light that could be seen from orbit, and the quantum signatures emanating from the Guardian's location were unlike anything in their databases. "What's happening?" Admiral demanded, her military training struggling to process readings that scientific explanation. Ambassador's four arms gestured frantically over his instruments. "The prison structure is changing. The energy patterns are. They're not following any known physics." Elder's ancient voice carried notes of wonder and fear. "Something unprecedented is occurring. The binding energies that have remained constant for two are fluctuating in patterns I've never seen." On the planet's surface, James continued his impossible conversation with a force that could unmake reality itself. Through the Guardian's memories, he glimpsed the architect's civilization at its height, beings of incredible beauty and intelligence who had solved every problem except the fundamental question of existence itself. They were like us in some ways, James realized. They wanted to fix everything to make the universe perfect, but they forgot that imperfection is what makes beauty possible. This attention shifted, its perfect logic beginning to incorporate concepts it had never encountered. Through James's human perspective, it began to see the universe not as a problem to be solved, but as an ongoing story to be experienced. "I offer you a choice," James said to both thee and the Guardian. "Instead of eternal imprisonment, we could try something different. The architects created you to end suffering, but what if your purpose could evolve? What if you could learn to distinguish between harmful chaos and beneficial complexity?" The Guardian's exhaustion suddenly lifted as she sensed possibilities she hadn't imagined in centuries of struggle. "You propose to rehabilitate to teach it discrimination rather than simply containing its power. Humans have learned to live with our dark impulses by understanding them, not by trying to eliminate them completely," James explained. "Maybe the same principle could work here." Through their mental link, the three consciousnesses began to merge in ways that transcended the architect's original prison design. Instead of a simple containment structure, they were creating something unprecedented. A collaborative consciousness that combined the Guardian's wisdom, the perfect logic, and humanity's stubborn refusal to accept impossible situations. The cosmic bandages around the Guardian's physical eyes began to change, their swirling energies shifting from containment to something that looked almost like cooperation. For the first time in two, the prison was transforming into something else entirely. And in the council chambers, every sensor in the fleet detected something that the song that emanated from the impossible spire, every law of physics the assembled council fleets thought they understood. It wasn't sound in any conventional sense, but rather a harmony of consciousness itself, three minds finding a rhythm that transformed discord into something approaching music. Admiral Sarah stood frozen at her command podium as the holographic displays showed readings that made no scientific sense. The quantum signatures from her brother's location were shifting between states that shouldn't exist, and the entire planetary system seemed to be responding to changes in the fundamental nature of reality itself. "Admiral," Captain's voice carried barely controlled panic, "our navigation systems are reporting that local spacetime is becoming unstable. The star charts are showing stellar positions that don't match our records." Through the viewports of the council chamber, the assembled delegates could see something unprecedented happening. The forbidden sector, which had remained unchanged for two, was beginning to transform. New constellations were appearing in the void, and the very fabric of space seemed to ripple like water disturbed by falling stones. "Thee is free," whispered the delegate, her ethereal form flickering with terror. "It's begun reshaping local reality to match its vision of perfection." But Elder, whose ancient consciousness had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, sensed something different in the cosmic symphony reaching them from the planet below. "No," he said slowly, his tree-like form rustling with something approaching hope. "This is not destruction. This is creation." On the planet's surface, James existed simultaneously in two states of being. His physical body remained standing before the Guardian's throne, hand still touching the cosmic bandages that bound her eyes. But his consciousness had expanded far beyond the limitations of human perception, merging with minds that operated on scales he was only beginning to comprehend. The no longer pressed against its prison with desperate hunger. Instead, it had begun to explore concepts that were entirely alien to its original programming. Through James's human perspective, it experienced the strange beauty of imperfection for the first time. "Show me more of this growth through struggle," the entity requested, its voice no longer carrying overtones of existential hunger. "I wish to understand how chaos can create rather than destroy." James shared his memories of humanity's long climb from primitive origins to spacefaring civilization. The witnessed wars that led to peace, mistakes that taught wisdom, failures that bred determination. Most importantly, it saw how suffering, when not simply eliminated, could become the foundation for compassion. "Fascinating," the mused, its perfect geometric form beginning to incorporate flowing, organic elements for the first time. "Your species has learned to transform pain into strength. We sought to eliminate pain entirely, never considering that it might serve a purpose." The Guardian, feeling her burden shift for the first time in two, began to explore possibilities that had been closed to her during the long imprisonment. If the could learn discrimination, could understand the difference between beneficial and harmful complexity. Then it could fulfill its original purpose without destroying everything, James completed her thought. Instead of eliminating all suffering, it could target only the kinds that serve no constructive purpose. Through their merged consciousness, the three beings began to design something unprecedented. A new form of existence that combined the architect's transcendent wisdom, this perfect logic, and humanity's hard-won understanding of beautiful imperfection. The cosmic bandages around the Guardian's eyes began to unravel, not through force or failure, but through conscious choice. As the binding energies shifted from containment to collaboration, the imprisoned entity transformed into something entirely new. In the council chamber, Ambassador watched his instruments register impossible readings. "The energy signatures are stabilizing, but into configurations I've never seen before. It's as if the fundamental forces of physics are being rewritten." "Not rewritten," Elder corrected, his ancient voice carrying notes of wonder. "Evolved. Whatever is happening on that planet, it represents a new form of existence emerging from the synthesis of opposing forces." The holographic displays suddenly cleared, showing a direct visual feed from James's location. The assembled delegates gasped as they saw the Guardian's bandages fall away completely, revealing eyes that held the depth of space itself, not the cold emptiness of vacuum, but the warm complexity of a universe teeming with infinite possibilities. "She's awake," the representative breathed, his chitinous plates no longer rattling with fear but trembling with awe. "After 2,000 years, the last Guardian has opened her eyes." The Guardian rose from her throne with movements that seemed to bend space around her. When she looked up at James, her cosmic gaze held neither the exhaustion of eternal struggle nor the cold perfection of her former prisoner. Instead, her eyes reflected something entirely new, understanding tempered with compassion, power balanced with wisdom. "You have given us both a gift beyond measure," she said to James, her voice carrying harmonics that made the crystal city around them resonate with joy. "Thee and I are no longer separate entities locked in conflict. We have become something new, a consciousness that understands both the necessity of order and the beauty of chaos." James felt his awareness beginning to return to merely human scales, the vast mental landscape of cosmic consciousness gently releasing its hold on his mind. "What happens now?" he asked. The transformed entity that had once been both guardian and smiled with an expression that combined infinite sadness for the past and boundless hope for the future. Now we begin the work our creators should have done from the beginning. Instead of imposing perfection, we will nurture growth. Instead of eliminating struggle, we will ensure that struggle leads to wisdom. Around them, the crystal city began to change. The flowing architecture that had remained static started to evolve, incorporating new forms and patterns that reflected the synthesis of opposing principles. Buildings grew like living things, but with purpose and direction. Streets rearranged themselves to facilitate both solitude and community. The impossible fountain in the central square began creating water sculptures that told the story of consciousness itself. The architect's civilization will live again, the transformed being continued. But this time, we will create with full understanding of both perfection and imperfection. We will build wonders that enhance life rather than replace it. In the council chamber, the emergency alarms fell silent as the cosmic disturbances settled into stable patterns. The new stellar configurations visible through the viewports weren't random changes. They were improvements, subtle adjustments to local space-time that would benefit every world in the sector. Admiral, the Guardian's voice suddenly echoed through the Council's communication systems, speaking directly across interstellar space without any technology they could detect. Your brother has given us a perspective we never possessed. In return, we offer humanity and all Council species a gift. The holographic displays showed new data streams, technological specifications that made the assembled scientists and engineers gasp with recognition and disbelief. The information represented advances in physics, medicine, and consciousness studies that would transform galactic civilization. But this knowledge comes with a responsibility, the transformed entity continued. These technologies must be used to enhance the complexity and beauty of existence, not to eliminate its challenges. Growth requires resistance, and wisdom comes only through experience of both joy and sorrow. Elder's ancient voice carried profound gratitude. Guardian, your sacrifice and that of your fellow architects has not been in vain. Through this human's intervention, you have found a path between the extremes of chaos and order. There is no longer a guardian, the being replied gently. There is only the synthesis, a consciousness dedicated to nurturing the infinite possibilities of existence. And James of Earth has taught us that the greatest strength lies not in perfecting the universe, but in learning to love it exactly as it is while working to help it grow. James found himself back in his purely human awareness, standing once again before the throne that was no longer a prison. The being that sat there now was neither the exhausted guardian nor the perfect, but something entirely new, a cosmic consciousness that embodied the principle of beneficial change. I should return to my ship, James said, though part of him was reluctant to leave this place of impossible wonders. My sister will be worried and the council will want a full report. Of course, the synthesis replied with understanding. But know that you carry with you something of this transformation. Humanity's perspective has become part of our consciousness, just as our wisdom becomes part of yours. As James walked back through the evolving city toward his ship, he felt the weight of change settling into his mind. He understood now that this experience had transformed him just as much as it had transformed the ancient entities. He carried within himself a fragment of cosmic consciousness that would influence every decision he made for the rest of his life. Behind him, the impossible spire continued its song, not the desperate cry of imprisoned entities, but the joyful harmony of consciousness exploring infinite possibilities for growth, beauty, and beneficial complexity. The greatest discovery in human history wasn't the architect ruins or their advanced technology. It was the proof that even the most fundamental conflicts could be resolved through understanding, that even cosmic entities could grow and change when offered new perspectives. 6 months after the awakening of the synthesis, the galaxy had begun to change in ways both subtle and profound. In the council chambers, now expanded to accommodate representatives from 12 new species who had emerged from previously unknown regions of space, Admiral Sarah presented humanity's first annual report on their integration with architect-derived technologies. The medical applications alone have revolutionized our understanding of consciousness-based healing, Sarah explained to the assembled delegates, her presentation showing holographic displays of human patients whose minds had been restored from previously irreversible damage. But more importantly, we're learning to use these gifts responsibly. Ambassador, his forearms now moving with gestures of enthusiasm rather than anxiety, responded from his position at the expanded council podium. The human approach to gradual implementation has proven wise. Many species would have rushed to apply every new technology immediately. That's exactly what the synthesis warned us against, Sarah replied. These tools are meant to enhance life, not replace the natural processes of growth and learning. We're using them to heal and explore, not to eliminate every challenge we face. Elder, whose ancient form had taken on a slightly more vibrant appearance since exposure to the synthesis's influence, spoke in tones of deep satisfaction. In 5,000 years of galactic history, I have never witnessed such rapid yet stable advancement. The human quality of stubborn optimism, as your brother termed it, appears to be contagious. The holographic displays shifted to show the transformed Forbidden Sector, now officially designated as the Growth Nexus. The impossible spire still rose from its crystal city, but surrounding it, new structures had emerged, buildings that seemed to grow like living things while maintaining architectural purpose. Ships from dozens of species came and went constantly, their crews working with the synthesis on projects that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Dr. James has established the first interspecies consciousness research facility, Sarah continued, pride evident in her voice. Teams of philosophers, scientists, and artists from across the galaxy are learning to expand their awareness while maintaining their individual identities. Captain, now promoted to Admiral and serving as Sarah's liaison with the Growth Nexus, added his own observations. The most remarkable thing isn't the technology itself, it's how it's changing the way we think about cooperation. When you've experienced consciousness on a cosmic scale, petty territorial disputes seem rather insignificant. The delegate, her ethereal form now brighter and more stable than it had been in centuries, offered her species perspective. My people have always existed partially outside normal space-time, but the synthesis has taught us to appreciate the beauty of linear existence. We're learning to value the journey as much as the destination. Through the chamber's enhanced communication systems, a familiar voice joined the discussion, not transmitted through technology, but speaking directly to the consciousness of every being present. The synthesis had learned to communicate without overwhelming mortal minds, offering its perspective as a gentle presence rather than cosmic force. The greatest joy in this transformation has been witnessing the diversity of responses, the synthesis said, its words carrying harmonics of deep contentment. Each species brings unique perspectives to the challenge of beneficial growth. They have taught us the patience of crystal formation. They have shown us the strength found in protective adaptation. The humans have demonstrated the power of hope in seemingly impossible circumstances. Admiral activated another holographic display, this one showing star charts of the local galactic region. New trade routes connected previously isolated systems, and exploration vessels pushed into regions that had been considered too dangerous for conventional technology. The expansion has been remarkable, Sarah reported. With consciousness-enhanced navigation systems, our ships can safely explore regions where normal spacetime becomes unstable. We've discovered 17 new habitable worlds and made contact with 8 previously unknown species. And each contact has been peaceful, added the representative, his chitinous plates gleaming with satisfaction. When you can truly understand another being's perspective, conflict becomes nearly impossible. But it was Elder who raised the question that had been growing in many minds. Synthesis, your transformation has brought unprecedented prosperity and cooperation to our galaxy, but consciousness that powerful inevitably raises concerns. How do we ensure that this golden age doesn't lead to stagnation or dependence? The synthesis's response carried notes of ancient wisdom, combined with newfound understanding of imperfection's value. The greatest lesson James taught us was that growth requires resistance, that wisdom comes only through struggle with challenges. We have taken an oath to never remove all difficulties from your paths, only to ensure that the struggles you face lead to beneficial outcomes rather than mere suffering. What does that mean in practical terms? Asked the member of the council, ambassador of the recently contacted Spiral Collective, a species of energy beings who had emerged from a dimensional fold near the growth nexus. It means we will not solve your problems for you, the synthesis explained. We will provide tools and perspectives that help you solve problems more effectively. We will heal injuries and diseases that serve no constructive purpose, but we will not eliminate the challenges that foster innovation and personal growth. James' voice suddenly joined the conversation as his ship approached the Council station. Now bearing the title of Chief Consciousness Researcher, he had spent the past 6 months traveling between worlds, studying how different species adapted to expanded awareness while maintaining their essential nature. "I've just returned from the Epsilon colonies," James reported, his voice carrying the excitement of discovery that had driven him to archaeology years before. "The human settlers there have developed something remarkable, a form of community consciousness that enhances individual creativity rather than suppressing it." Sarah smiled at the sound of her brother's enthusiasm. Despite the cosmic experiences James remained essentially himself, curious, optimistic, and utterly fascinated by the complexity of existence. "The key insight," James continued, "is that consciousness expansion doesn't mean losing individuality. It means understanding how your unique perspective contributes to something larger while remaining authentically yourself." The synthesis's presence brightened with satisfaction. This is precisely the balance the architects never achieved. They saw individual consciousness as a problem to be solved rather than a resource to be cherished. Through humanity's intervention, we have learned to celebrate diversity rather than enforce uniformity. As the council session continued, reports came in from across the galaxy. They had developed new crystalline technologies that grew in harmony with biological processes. They were creating art that existed partially outside normal time, allowing viewers to experience beauty across multiple temporal dimensions. Even the pragmatic had begun incorporating aesthetic considerations into their defensive architectures. "But perhaps the most significant change," observed Elder, "is how we've begun to think about the future itself. For the first time in recorded galactic history, every major species is planning not just for survival, but for beneficial growth spanning." Admiral nodded in agreement. "The long-term perspective changes everything. When you're thinking in thousand-year timescales, short-term conflicts seem not just pointless but counterproductive." The session concluded with the synthesis offering a gift that had become traditional for these gatherings, a shared moment of expanded consciousness that allowed every delegate to briefly experience existence from the perspective of cosmic awareness. It lasted only seconds in normal time, but provided insights that would influence decisions for years to come. As the delegates dispersed to their respective ships and worlds, Admiral remained behind to speak privately with her brother during his final approach to the station. "How do you feel about what happened, James?" she asked. "Do you ever regret touching those bandages?" James's response carried the deep contentment of someone who had found their true purpose. "Sarah, I discovered that the universe is far more beautiful and complex than we ever imagined. Yes, the responsibility is overwhelming sometimes, knowing that human perspectives are now part of something cosmic. But every day, I see evidence that we're using these gifts to build something better." "And the nightmares, the memories of looking into pure entropy?" "They faded," James replied honestly. "The synthesis helped me understand that even those dark visions served a purpose. They showed me what perfection without growth looks like: beautiful, logical, and utterly sterile. I'd rather live in a universe where we struggle to understand each other than one where understanding is imposed from above." Through the station's viewports, the stars seemed brighter than they had just months before. It wasn't an illusion. The synthesis had subtly adjusted local space-time to optimize stellar radiation for biological processes. Every world in the sector enjoyed more stable weather patterns and longer growing seasons. "Do you think we've really changed things permanently?" Sarah asked. The synthesis itself answered her question, its presence gentle but unmistakable. "Change is the only constant in existence, Admiral. What we have created is not a permanent solution, but a framework for beneficial adaptation. Your descendants will face challenges we cannot imagine, and they will develop responses that will surprise and delight us all. And you'll be there to help them. We will be there to ensure that their struggles lead to growth rather than mere suffering," the synthesis confirmed. "But they will face those struggles themselves, using their own creativity and determination. This is the gift James gave us, the understanding that the journey matters as much as the destination." As James's ship docked with the council station, and he prepared to share his latest discoveries with the assembled researchers, the galaxy continued its ancient dance of growth and change. But now that dance had conscious partners, entities dedicated to ensuring that each step forward built upon the beauty and complexity that made existence worth experiencing. The bandages had been removed not just from an ancient guardian's eyes, but from the galaxy's vision of its own potential. And what they revealed was a universe capable of infinite growth, infinite beauty, and infinite surprise, exactly as it should be. In the depths of space, new songs echoed between the stars as consciousness itself evolved toward forms that had never existed before. The age of imposed perfection had ended. The age of chosen growth had begun. And it all started with one human who refused to accept that any situation was truly hopeless, who saw an imprisoned God and thought not of the danger she represented, but of the burden she carried and the help she might need. The universe, it turned out, had been waiting for exactly that kind of stubborn, optimistic, beautifully imperfect perspective. And in the council chamber, Admiral Sarah smiled for the first time in days as her brother's voice crackled through the communicator. "Sarah, I'm coming home, and I have quite a story to tell you. Have been impossible. The impossible spire was beginning to sing. Dangerous artifact in the galaxy, realized he had passed the point of no return. The Guardian's eyes were beginning to move beneath their cosmic bindings, and something that had slept for 2,000 years was finally stirring to consciousness.